Hello and welcome back to another full step-by-step PC build guide, and today I'm going to be showing you how to build a PC in the Cougar Duoface Pro RGB. The case is currently on sale for just under $100 US. It does come in both black and white, and it's actually going to be the first Cougar case that I'm covering on the channel, so really keen to check it out. So let's take a look at the other parts I'm going to be building with today. For the motherboard, I'm going to be using ASRock's X670E Taichi Carrara. For the CPU, I'm going to be using AMD's Ryzen 9, the 7900X. Keeping our CPU cool, I've got a 360mm AIO from ASUS. It's the ROG RYUO 3. For RAM, I've got 32GB of Kingston Fury Renegade DDR5 at 7200 megatransfers per second. For storage, I'm going to be using a single Gen 4 NVMe drive from ADATA. It's their Legend 960 in 1TB capacity. Powering the whole build, I've got a 1200 watt fully modular ATX 3.0 power supply from MONTECH. It's their Titan Gold. And for the graphics card, I'm going to be using the ASUS ROG STRIX RTX 4080. Okay, so that's all the parts. Let's take a closer look at the case. To remove our case's tempered glass panel, there's a captive thumb screw at the back we need to loosen, and then we can simply tilt the case out from the side and lift away. To remove the other side panel, there's two captive thumb screws at the back we need to loosen, and then we can pull the panel backwards and lift away. Taking a look at our case's top I/O, we've got a power button, we've got a button to control the case's built-in ARGB controller, we've got a combined headphone and microphone jack, we've got a single USB Type-C port, we've got two USB 3.0 Type-A ports, and a single USB 2.0 Type-A port. On the top of the case, we've got a magnetically attached dust filter, which we can simply lift up and then lift away. So out of the box, the case comes with a tempered glass panel on the front, and there is a little cutout on both sides of it for airflow. Now this panel is removable. There's 4 push pegs, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom you simply need to remove, and then the panel can be lifted out and away. So behind the panel, we've got a dust filter, and it can simply be pulled out to the side for cleaning. So you can see at the front of the case, Cougar have pre-installed 3 120mm ARGB fans. If you prefer at the front, you can mount up to 2 140mm fans or up to a 360 or 280mm radiator. And the reason the case is called the Duoface Pro is you've got two options for the front panel. There's the tempered glass panel that we've just removed, or we've got this perforated panel here, which I think is going to give us better airflow. So this is the one that I'm going to install, and it's just a matter of simply pushing it into place at the front. At the rear of the case, we've got another 120mm ARGB fan pre-installed. If you prefer at the rear of the case, you can mount up to a 140mm fan or up to a 140mm radiator. The fan and radiator support at the top of the case is exactly the same as the front, up to 3 120 or 240mm fans, or up to a 280 or 360mm radiator. Now this top panel is removable to give you better access into the build and simplify installing your fans and radiator at the top. There's just 2 screws at the top that we're going to need to remove. With the 2 screws removed, we can simply tilt the top panel up and lift away. On the power supply side, we're also going to be able to mount 2 120mm fans. You can see we've got the holes here. You're simply going to set your fans on top, and then we're going to use some long radiator screws to secure the fans in from the top, and these are included in the case accessory box. In terms of motherboard support, the case supports up to ATX motherboards, and if you want to go with a CPU cooler, you can fit a pretty large cooler in this case up to a maximum height of 190mm. We've got a cable management bracket here, which is going to help hide the cables plugged into the right hand side of the motherboard, and in its current position it's set up for up to an ATX motherboard. We've got an ATX motherboard, so we're going to need to move the bracket to its setting further towards the right hand side. Now there's 2 screws in the back of the case that we're going to have to loosen. With the thumb screws removed to the back, we're then going to be able to lift this bracket up in the air to remove it. And you'll notice we've got 2 little cutouts here. Originally we were installed on this one, and we've got another one here further to the right hand side. And if we take a look at the bracket we've just removed, you'll notice it's got a little hook here. So it's just a matter of lowering the bracket down and getting that little hook into the second cutout, and then we can secure the bracket at the back with the 2 thumb screws. So if we take a look at the back of the case, you'll notice that only 6 of the standoffs that we're going to need are pre-installed. The other 3 standoffs that we're going to need for our motherboard are in the case accessory box, which is in the hard drive cage at the back of the case. So the 3 standoffs we're going to put in are into these holes in line with the other standoffs that have been installed. So we can simply set the standoff into place. And also in the case accessory box, we get this standoff insertion and removal tool, which simply slots over the standoff and allows you to use a screwdriver to put the standoff into place. At the rear of the case we've got 7 horizontal PCI expansion slots as well as 3 vertical slots in front of it. Now the only side issue I can see with these slots is, particularly with a beefy graphics card like we're using, the graphics card is going to be quite close to the tempered glass panel. So I'm going to install my graphics card horizontally at the back. The big advantage of having these 3 vertical slots in front is the case is actually really quite wide in this direction. So even with the beefy cards that we have now and 12-volt Type R connectors at the front, we shouldn't have any problem getting our side panel back into place. And in terms of the length of the graphics card, it's up to a maximum length of 390mm. So as well as accommodating large graphics cards, the case should also support them pretty well with this built-in GPU support bracket. There's a little thumb screw at the bottom which we need to loosen, and then with it loosened we're going to be able to slide the bracket up into where it supports our graphics card and tighten the thumb screw to hold it in place. So to allow us to install our graphics card, I'm just going to leave this at the bottom for now. On the bottom of the case we've got a tray-style dust filter which can simply be pulled out from the back for cleaning. Moving over to the rear of the case, we can see we've got cutouts in plenty of sensible places, and we've got rubber grommets over the 2 cutouts at the top and also this one towards the front of the case. Obviously this one doesn't have any rubber grommets on it because this cable cover bracket is hopefully going to help hide the cables. In terms of cable management, the cable routing space actually looks quite good, and we've got these Velcro cable straps in the middle with some plastic clips helping organise the cables in the middle, and plenty of cable tie down points in other places. We can see our case's built-in ARGB hub here, and we can see our 4 pre-installed fans are already plugged into it, together with this connection because there's some ARGB lighting on the Cougar logo at the front of the case. So this leaves us with 1 spare ARGB port to plug an additional device into, and we can see here we've got the reset switch cable plugged into here, meaning we're going to be able to press the button on the top of the case to cycle through the controller's built-in ARGB effects. We're also going to have motherboard control. We can see coming from the bottom we've got a 3-pin 5-volt ARGB cable and also a SATA power cable, so make sure you plug this into your power supply, otherwise the ARGB effects on the controller are not going to work. So our pre-installed case fans come with 3-pin fan connectors on them, so you are going to have to run them in DC mode rather than PWM mode, and in the case accessory box we get this triple fan splitter cable. So I'm going to take our 3 front fans and simply plug them into the triple splitter cable. So that's just going to leave us 1 3-pin connector to power all 3 of the front case fans. We've got 2 dedicated 2.5-inch drive mounted brackets behind our motherboard. They're each held on with a captive thumb screw, and you're able to remove your bracket, fix your drive to the back of it, and then reinstall it in the case. At the bottom of the case we've got a hard drive cage where we can mount up to 2 3.5-inch drives. The hard drive cage is movable and removable. There's a thumb screw at the top which we're going to need to remove, and then we can simply pull the hard drive cage to remove it from the case. There is the option to move the hard drive cage further forward. You can see we've got another hole for a thumb screw here, so it'll just be a matter of lining our hard drive cage up and pushing it into place, making sure we're not catching any of our case cables, and then we can put the thumb screw in here to secure it into place, and that's going to give us more room for our power supply. I'm not planning on installing any hard drives, so I'm just going to simply remove the cage. Our power supply is going to go down at the bottom, and the case is compatible with full-sized ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 200mm. We can see at the back of the case we don't have any removable power supply bracket, so we are going to have to insert our power supply in from the side before screwing it in from the back. We are now ready to start work on our motherboard, and we're going to be installing our CPU, the bracket for our CPU cooler, our M.2 SSD and our RAM before we put the motherboard into the case. To open our socket cover we're going to need to push this lever down and out and then bring it all the way to the middle of the motherboard, and then we should be able to open the socket cover up. We can then set our CPU down into the socket. You'll notice there's notches at the bottom and at the top to help line the CPU up. We'll give it a little wiggle from side to side to check it's properly seated in the socket, and once we're happy it is, we can go ahead and close the socket cover. To secure the CPU in the socket, we're just going to simply close the lever down again. As we do, the black bit of plastic will pop off and we'll put it into the motherboard box for safekeeping. Next we've got our M.2 SSD which we're going to install in the top slot, and we need to loosen these 2 screws to remove the heatsink. We can then set our M.2 SSD into the socket, go ahead and flatten it down, and then we'll use a screw from the motherboard box to secure the drive in place. If you're using the motherboard from new, there'll be some plastic protection on the back of the heatsink that you're going to need to remove, and then we can return the heatsink. To install the brackets for our CPU cleaner, the first thing we're going to need to do is remove these stock AMD clips. They're each held on by 2 screws. Next we've got these brackets to go on. There's one for the top and one for the bottom, and you notice a little arrow pointing towards the CPU, helping you orientate the bracket. And then we're going to secure the bracket into place with the 4 screws that we've just removed. And again, make sure you pop these in your motherboard box for safekeeping. Because we've only got 2 sticks of RAM, we're going to install it in the 2nd and 4th slot along from the CPU. So I'm going to go ahead and open the clips on both those slots. Then I'm going to line the RAM up with the slot. Once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the RAM and it's going to clip into place. And exactly the same thing with our 2nd stick of RAM, line it up and some firm pressure. We can then set the motherboard into the case, line that up with the standoffs at the back, and then we'll secure the motherboard into place with 9 of the screws with a little lip around the outside. Next thing to do is get our case cables plugged in, and we're going to make a start with our HD audio cable, which goes into this header down the bottom left hand side of the motherboard. So we'll bring the cable through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place, and then we'll pull the excess cable through to the back. 2 headers along, we've got a system fan header, so we're going to bring the triple splitter cable coming from our fans in the front of the case through, line it up with the header and push into place. Again, another 2 headers along, we've got one of this motherboard's 3 ARGB headers, so we're going to bring the ARGB cable coming from our hub through, line it up with the header and push into place. Next to that, we've got 2 USB 2.0 headers, so we'll bring our USB 2.0 cable through, line it up with the header and push into place. Our front panel connectors are going to go into this header here, so we'll bring our cables through the cutout, and as you can see we've got a whole variety of different cables to plug into certain pins in this header, so it is important to pay attention to the diagram in the motherboard manual. So starting off at the bottom row, working from left to right, first of all we've got hard drive LED positive and hard drive LED negative. If you'd rather have the button on the front of the case working as a reset switch, remove the reset switch cable from the ARGB controller and plug it in to the next 2 pins. Moving up to the top row into pins 1 and 2, we've got power LED positive and power LED negative. And then next to that, we've got our power switch. Our USB 3.0 cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll go ahead and bring it through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place. And then we'll just pull the excess cable through to the back. Just below that, we've got our front panel Type C header, so we'll bring our cable through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place. And again, we'll just pull the excess cable through to the back. We've got a system fan header at the top right of the motherboard, so we can bring the 3-pin cable coming from our rear fan through, line it up with the header and push into place, and then push the excess cable through to the back. We're now ready to install our power supply, and it is a fully modular power supply, so it comes without any of these cables plugged in. So I've gone ahead and plugged in our 24-pin cable, 2 8-pin EPS cables. We've got our 12-volt high power cable for our graphics card, and I've also plugged in a SATA power cable to power our ARGB hub. So this is our power supply's intake fan, so we're going to install it facing down where it can get cool air from underneath the case. So it's just a matter of moving all these case cables out of the way, and then sliding our power supply in from the bottom. And then we'll slide the power supply all the way to the back of the case. We can then secure the power supply into place with 4 of the larger screws from the case accessory box. Our 2 EPS cables are going to go into these headers at the top of the motherboard. So we can go ahead and bring our cables through the cutout, line them up with the header and push into place. And then we'll just pull all the excess cable through to the back. Our 24-pin cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll go ahead and bring the cable in through the cutout. We can line the cable up with the header and push into place, and then we'll pull the excess cable through to the back. So that was a little bit tricky getting that cable plugged in. What would make it easier is if we wanted to remove this cable cover, install the cables, and then put the cable cover back on. And then at the back of the case, we can plug the SATA cable coming from our ARGB controller into the SATA cable coming from our power supply. Next, we can set our fans onto the radiator, and then we're going to use these long radiator screws to secure the fans to the radiator. So coming from each of our fans, we've got 3 cables. The first is a 4-pin PWM connector, and ASUS do include this 3-to-1 triple splitter cable with the IO. So it's just a matter of taking each of the 4-pin connectors and plugging it into the triple splitter cable. So that's just going to leave us one 4-pin PWM connector to plug into the CPU fan header. The other cable coming from each of the fans is a 3-pin 5V ARGB cable, and ASUS include this 4:1 ARGB splitter cable. So it's just a matter of lining each of the cables up with the splitter cable. We're then going to plug the other end of the ARGB cable into our case's ARGB hub. Alternatively, we could plug it directly into an ARGB header on the motherboard. And we've also got one spare ARGB header on the cable if we wanted to add an additional device into it. Moving over to our pump, we've got two cables coming from it. The first is a 4-pin PWM connector, and we're going to plug that into our pump header on the motherboard. And the other is a USB 2.0 cable, and we're going to plug that into USB 2.0 header on the motherboard. We can then set our case's top panel into place, and then we're going to use these short radiator screws to secure the radiator to the top panel. And at this stage we can then return the dust filter. So just before we put our top panel into place, I'm just going to pass all the cables through to the back. And then I'm just going to set the top panel up into place, and as we do, I'll pull the cables through at the back. So you can see here as I'm trying to lower our top bracket down, the tubes in our AIO are actually catching on our front fan bracket. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen all the screws at the top and try and slide our radiator as far towards the back of the case as I can. So with our radiator now loose at the top, I'm able to slide it as far towards the back of the case as I can. And then if we lower the panel down, it is going to clip into place. And I'll just go ahead and tighten the screws up again at the top. We can then re-secure the top panel with the two screws we removed at the start. Our CPU fan header is this header here at the top of the motherboard, so I'm going to bring the 4-pin PWM cable coming from the fans back through to the case. We'll line that up with the header and push into place. As we mentioned, the ARGB cable coming from our fans, we could plug into an ARGB header on our motherboard, but because our case is this ARGB hub, it makes sense to plug it into it. Next I'm going to add some thermal paste to the centre of the CPU. If you get the cooler from new, it will be pre-applied to the cold plate and you don't need to add more. So you see what I've done with the cables coming out the bottom of the I/O. This is the bottom, and I just like to wrap these around the brackets so they're controlled nicely coming up to the top of the motherboard. So then we can line the pump up with the bracket beneath, and then we're going to use 4 of the thumb screws with the grooves in the middle to secure the pump to the bracket. So our pump header is this one in the middle at the top of the motherboard. So I'm going to bring the 4-pin PWM cable coming from our pump and plug it into the header. And then I'm just going to route the excess cable up towards the top of the case and pass it through to the back. I'm also going to pass the USB cable coming from our pump through to the back of the case as well. And then we've got another USB 2.0 header down at the bottom of the case. So I'm going to bring our USB cable through, line it up with the header and push into place. We are now ready to install our graphics cards. We're going to remove the 3rd and 4th slot cover from the top. We can then open the clip in the top PCIe slot on the motherboard. Then we can set our graphics card into the case, line it up with the slot. And then once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the graphics card and it's going to clip into place. And then we can secure the graphics card into place with the 2 screws we removed earlier on. We can then move our GPU support bracket up towards providing support for the graphics card and then tighten up the thumb screw. And then a very important step for any GPU support bracket is make sure our graphics card fan can spin freely and the support bracket's not going to catch on the fan. We can then bring our 12V type power cable through the cutout at the bottom, line it up with the graphics card and push into place, making sure we get a nice satisfying click. So I'm just looking at the black cable. It looks okay, but I do think a white cable extension would look much better. So if we unplug the 12V high power cable from the graphics card, and then we're going to plug it into a cable extension. We can plug the cable extension into the graphics card. And then we'll pull the excess cable through to the back. And just make sure the cables are nice and tidy with the included cable combs. So I think that definitely looks much cleaner. Okay, last thing to do is some cable management so we're able to get the side panels back on again. So I've gone ahead and dimmed the lights to give you a look at the ARGB effects coming from the case's built-in controller. So to cycle through the various effects, we just need to press the LED button on the top of the case. So if we want to sync things up with our motherboard, because we have plugged in the ARGB cable coming from the controller to our motherboard, we can hold this button for 3 seconds. And it's then going to sync up with our motherboard, and I currently have the motherboard lighting set to white. To get back onto the controller again, it's just a press, and then we'll be able to continue to cycle through. If we want to turn the lighting off, it's just a matter of holding the button in for 6 seconds. Then it's the second time it flashes, the lighting will go off. And again, we just need to press it again to get the lighting back on again. So that's the build complete and looking great. If you don't know how to install Windows, the drivers, enter the BIOS, update the BIOS, and adjust all the BIOS settings, I've made a separate video on it, and I'll put a link to that video in the description. Likewise, if you want to know how to set up this AIO, I've covered it in another video, and you'll find a link to that video in the description as well. What I'm planning on doing now is some thermal testing. So I'm going to test out the glass panel. I'm going to test out installing the graphics card vertically and check out the temperature differences we get with that. So if you are thinking of doing a build in this case, you're going to have all the information you need to make the best decisions. After that, I'm going to go ahead and do a full case review. So you'll find all that temperature testing and the case review in a separate video. And again, I'll link to that video in the description. If you have enjoyed this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.